Geography and politics are two factors that are linked and fused in a purely unified way, both completing and developing one another within a nation's development strategy. Geopolitics is a key location that opens the door for actions to design development problems and calculate strategic interests. So, how did this term form and develop historically? Have you ever wondered, in countries' foreign policies, geopolitics is embedded in identity? A prominent orange patch can carry negative or positive meaning for the rise or decline of that country. Because of its geography, far from the Asian continent, Japan escaped invasion by the Mongol Empire at its peak. Also, because of geography, Russia drew Napoleon's legions deep into an icy, desolate path, burying France's military power. Furthermore, why did Hitler's and Napoleon's ambitions always seek to invade and control the world island of Britain to expand influence, rather than somewhere else? Why has the South China Sea become a battlefield for conflicts in international relations, especially between the US and China? A series of geographic terms, taking political form and being humanized with strategic interest value, even vital interests of nations, emerges from such issues. From those problems, this video is only an introduction and clarification of the concept of geopolitics, its origins and development, thereby providing foundational knowledge of geopolitics to help readers, in a small way, explain the political reasons hidden behind any geographic area on today's world map. So, what is geopolitics? Geopolitic, is a metaphorical phrase or shorthand that expresses a strong attitude by a powerful subject toward a highly politicized space through the use of written or spoken language in order to promote a geographic template/pattern, with the purpose of upgrading geography in a way that implies very high interests and demonstrates special concern. For example, the world island refers to Britain, with military potential and, one could say, a leading sea power in the world at the time it was named. The subject that intensifies a geographic region on the map into a geopolitical space is usually a holder of public power or the state. This subject will assign and divide the geopolitical meaning of that space. In that context, the holders of public power are often the media with power, credibility, authority, and also the academic/intellectual world. Regarding media, persistent, impression-forming propaganda often has a powerful effect in shaping thinking. Audiences watching Hollywood films often develop sympathetic perspectives about US troops landing in the Middle East to fight global terrorism. Globalization unfolds when information becomes a common commodity. When it is repeated many times and crosses censorship barriers, it will create clearer collective consciousness about the geopolitical region the subject wants to convey. Next, regarding the academic community, well-known researchers will often reflect on the interests of a certain region in the world. They publish research knowledge on highly regarded academic platforms. Expert authority creates conditions for content to spread to many other sources. In that process, researchers play an extremely large role. They can become a primary source for state political statements or a foundation for media knowledge. Moreover, forecasts produced after long periods of research will further strengthen the humanization of geographic information in political terms when it is received not only within the country where they live, but also strongly supported by other countries that share the same interests. Finally, the most common subject is the state. The state holds political power and has an obvious capacity to upgrade a geographic metric, whether domestically in terms of development potential or globally. Terms such as the axis of evil and the allies become common in political actions in interstate relations. Toward the outside, professional diplomatic agencies establish the country's foreign policy posture and behavior toward that region. Such names bring about a decisive attitude, either clearly friendly or clearly hostile. A country's geopolitical naming of any geographic region in the world will almost always create deep division. However, this is only appropriate for great powers or superpowers with world-leading influence. In summary, geopolitics is a metaphorical term for a geographic space that is concretely politicized by a subject for a purpose. Geopolitical action can commonly exist in three forms, quoted from the classification in Professor C.L.A. Dute's book Geopolitics, Knowledge Publishing House, page 86 as follows. History of the term geopolitics. We have all joked with one another about a familiar place or space in its most general meaning. When there is thorough shared understanding of the importance of that geographic space, the subject uses personal linguistic style and identity to intensify the place. For example, in hide and seek, the hider might arrange to meet at an outstanding spot marked by coded language hidden under a name like Dokong Coal Furnace, implying a hiding location known only to a few people. This is an early expression of the hidden meaning characteristic of geopolitics. However, that expression is not yet geopolitics, because that geography must include the political factor. We understand politics as the work of the state and the concern with seizing, maintaining, and exercising power. Therefore, geography must be assigned a clear political meaning by a subject who possesses state power. Only then does it become the complete concept of geopolitics. No one can know exactly the very first origin of using a geopolitical style to represent a spatial purpose that the subject wants to refer to. But clearly, as stated above, the presence of geopolitics must appear at the same time as, or after, the existence of the state. It cannot exist before the state exists. According to the explanation of Marxism-Leninism, the state was born from the exploitation of the ruling class. The state only appears when society is divided into classes, corresponding to the period of slave-owning society. After that, through the invasion expeditions of the ruling class state, in building operational battle plans, the first use of the term geopolitics remains a major question mark. But it is very possible that in war specifically and in the military generally, a method was used to humanize a place into a key political security position. Over time, this usage became increasingly affirmed as a science of geopolitics. If considered as a scientific term, the interdisciplinary term geopolitics was first used and developed through 4 major stages. Sweden is considered the birthplace. The term geopolitics was first used by the Swedish scientist Rudolf Kjellin in 1899. He first used this term in the journal International Politics and introduced it into research and teaching during the period when European colonialism was strongest. His terms circulated smoothly not only within academia, but also integrated into the political calculations of rulers. Some colonial states began to exploit the power and meaning of the term by specializing it through ministerial agencies, such as the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They intensified propaganda and developed the term as a way to imply the expansion of many foreign policies across the world, especially toward key geographic regions that needed to be held long-term or exploited completely and then abandoned. After that, they calculated geographic energy plans in those regions for their own development. Capitalist energy industry required extremely large amounts of fossil fuels and coal, along with durable human labor capacity. Naturally, the geopolitical focus desired by colonial powers was Africa, with populations considered physically strong. Conversely, fossil fuels had to be exploited, so young continents like the Americas were also targeted. Moreover, capitalist production under a market mechanism is commodity, money, commodity. In plain words, they needed markets to drive this mechanism. Large markets in Asia therefore became a priority. Because of China's historical and cultural depth, Western geopolitical researchers at that time described China as a cake cut into many slices. The largest country in Asia was torn apart and had its nutrients drained as a market. Colonial powers created a mobile, peaceful playing field for anyone who wanted to join the game. China became a pawn for experimentation on the grand chessboard of Western politics at that time. In that period, French colonialism applied many geopolitical strategies in Vietnam, such as the idea that whoever controls the Central Highlands controls Indochina, and their larger ambition, to control Indochina as a springboard to enter the northern market arena of China. The development of administrative geography, the precursor to geopolitics, in France reached its peak through brilliant and highly poetic minds. They designed and divided Vietnam's administrative geography according to a highly standardized, precise framework for each region. Every provincial administrative boundary in Vietnam was divided based on benefits for an economic development model, for people, and for specific sociocultural characteristics. Nothing was random in that division. Everything had clear intentions. To this day, That administrative geographic division still exists, and the Vietnamese state still applies it in essentially the same way as in history. It can be seen that at first, geopolitics was merely an implied concept about a space or a location between people. Similarly, it was purely a geographic science helping politics divide and administer national territory. However, with development and under new directions, new visions, and new colonial circumstances, it became fertile ground for sowing the first seeds of geopolitics. In short, the early concept of geopolitics stimulated curiosity about a novel political science. The state created corridors and opportunities for it to develop. Academic circles added many brighter colors to it. Geopolitics began to reach out to the world and take shape in the foreign policy thinking and political calculations of rulers. Nazi Germany developed it intensely. The smooth and convenient spread of geopolitics, in the context of expanding colonial space, was further developed in a new form, imperialism. Countries with extremist ideologies began to absorb geopolitical content. This turned geopolitics into an extended arm of their policies, especially when Germany, ruled by Hitler, began to develop a concept of the state in international relations, particularly Hitler's idea of the state as a superorganism constantly demanding living space. From that point, geopolitics both fit the general development of the world's circumstances and satisfied the intentions of the dictator Hitler. It was like a fish in water, like a tree planted in good soil and watered. A clear sign of this was that geopolitics became a subject first introduced into teaching in Nazi Germany. From a historical perspective, geopolitics provided Germany in particular, and the fascist bloc more broadly, with a geographic scene that supposedly needed to be invaded, sowing resentment through politicized meaning. It was a good doctrine, but used incorrectly. German fascism loudly insisted it must seize France and subdue Russia. Of course, this remains a geopolitical lesson, especially in Europe, when Britain is a country with a distinctive geography that helped it stay removed from all continental wars, yet it also possesses a geography that is constantly eyed by others. Hitler's actions always aimed to take Britain first, and his hostile moves against France and Russia were only initial steps. The lesson from Napoleon, his ambition to dominate continental Europe in order to bargain with and isolate Britain, had failed. Hitler wanted to strike Britain directly, but he ran into geographic shielding by France. Therefore, the invasion of France was unavoidable in Germany's plan. Indeed, geopolitics was an important discipline that helped German rulers pursue territorial expansionist ambitions. Naturally, fascist systems such as Italy and Japan began to learn from Germany. These two countries pushed invasions of other nations, driven by special geographic interests. Looking back at Japan's fascist expansion toward neighboring countries, we always see the deeper perspective that geopolitics provides. Japanese politics propagandized and fabricated all kinds of narratives about the geographic advantages and benefits of Korea and China for its people. From that, it created an emotional numbness toward other peoples and quickly stimulated an awareness of geographic ambition for a larger, greater national future. On the other hand, Japan also emphasized its own disadvantages in geographic fortune because the country faced many natural disasters and catastrophes. Therefore, geopolitical expansion was portrayed as obvious. In short, geopolitics became an important content area during the fascist period because it matched the ruling ideology and was promoted by the personal ambitions of dictators who rejected the world. After fascism was extinguished, geopolitical trends were labeled by the world as toxic, a politically sensitive term, a symbol of fascism. Countries around the world gradually boycotted the use of the term in all fields, including academia. Research rules absolutely avoided it and treated it as an evil science. This was a dark period for geopolitics. There was no further scientific development. Geopolitics was a young aspect, newly emerged and not yet a century old, yet by that point it was banned, and no one could research or develop it. However, a small number of professors still studied it. They were accused of having strong fascist tendencies and were stigmatized. Then, as Europe and the United States moved toward recovery and stabilization, the Cold War broke out. A trend of war could arise at any time if one of the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, made the first move. They began to turn to geopolitics to conduct proxy wars, then built many alliance organizations and carried out research on many geographic regions with major significance in order to restrain the opponent. These desires began to reawaken geopolitics' potential. Indeed, more open and objective research on geopolitics began to appear in specialized international relations journals. In particular, Henry Kissinger reused many geopolitically flavored terms such as the axis of evil, the Third Empire, and so on. A foreign minister ignited the first spark for a long stride in researching geopolitics. He brought it back onto the right track, restoring its value in developing geography. Schools in the United States began to reconsider it and to build coursework on geopolitics. The enthusiastic reception from a leading superpower further increased its development. Through allies and the countries sponsored within the capitalist bloc, pro-US nations absorbed it and exploited it, incorporating it into research theories. Policies for developing geopolitical regions began circulating. Countries no longer used force as the means to pursue geopolitics, but instead shifted to cooperation, transferring factories, cooperating with Italy, and pursuing the exploitation of geopolitical benefits. From there, the desire to extract geopolitical advantages began to emerge. The process of transnational globalization created momentum for development. Expanded exchange and cooperation, along with many international organizations, created a more stable environment, and the developmental meaning of geopolitics began to move in a more positive direction. It can be seen that geopolitics as a field has a very young research history, yet it has faced many obstacles. Frightening declarations aimed at crushing something as meaningful as geopolitics could not last long. The core developmental meaning, discovering where there are many beneficial nutrients, developing people, using geography for human benefit, will be the ultimate destination of politics. Geopolitics has gone through many ups and downs, but in the end it has still risen strongly. It carries within itself a lofty value. But if the user of it wants to transmit it in order to serve only their own interests, it will be corrupted. Therefore, a good theory must go together with correct practice. Through this, we hope you now have an overall view of this term. If you have opinions, don't hesitate to share them in the comments. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to support us. Don't forget to click the notification bell next to it so you don't miss any videos we release in the future.